WPwatercooler, episode number 352. We're going to be revisiting WordPress security and kind of talking a little bit about WordPress security and the WordPress security basics. Before we get into that, I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by ServerPress, makers of the desktop server. They make local WordPress development easy. Feel free to go take a look at their site over at serverpress.com. They also have another product called WP Site Sync, where they got some really great things over there where you can sync up sites between your local site and the development sites or production to another production site. It's fun stuff. Feel free to go take a look at that over at serverpress.com. Steve, kick us off. Tell us about yourself.
I am Steve Zeggett. I'm the founder of Zeek Interactive, and I run the OC WordPress meetup.
How about you, Cosper?
Hey, everybody. Jason Cosper, a.k.a. Fat Mullenweg, a.k.a. The Bigger Lebowski. Just happy to talk about WordPress and re-up on some security basics today.
Nice. I'm Jason Tucker. You can find me over at Jason Tucker on Twitter, and my website is jasontucker.blog. I do the show as well as another show called WP Blab. Today we talked about funding open source with agency work. And Chris Badgett just kind of laid it down there and told us all sorts of stuff about that. If you don't know anything about him, he runs Lifter LMS, and he talked about how he used his agency to kind of fund that that project that he was working on, so he can build a successful product and kind of run with that. So go take a look at that. We did some good stuff over there. Yeah, let's talk about security. Let's get into it. So what about security? I don't know. There's plenty of places to start with this, and I was thinking probably the one that we've discussed in the past. I'd say probably like episode number 40 or 30 or something of the show, where we were talking about like back in the day, we were like, oh, you can't have the admin account. You got to get rid of the admin account. You got to change it so it's now your name or something else like that. How much of that do you feel still holds true, that admin name, like the name admin is? How do you guys feel about that?
All of it. It all still holds true.
What about you, Cosper? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I believe WPScan, which is a hacker tool, but I mean, you can also use it for security auditing your site, uses admin as one of the default usernames that it checks for. So, the tool that hackers are using right out of the gate, it's probably a good idea to avoid what they're using as something that they check for.
What do you think, Steve?
I agree. I mean, a lot of our business is inheriting other websites, and I think we see this running rampant, right? So these, we'll inherit sites that came from WordPress 3, 4. Sometimes even older, right? So these problems are absolutely still around.
Yeah, I mean, like you were talking about using the scanning software. Those are essentially like enumerating the accounts that are on the site to try to figure out, which accounts are there and what's using it. And if the admin was the default one, then that's a good place to start. You could at least take that and now at least the username and say like, boom, boom, boom. Let's test all these passwords and see what we can do to get in there.
The password is either password or password 123. They may have, at this point, added an exclamation point on the end.
Oh man.
Maybe. Yeah. But it's one of those three passwords. So if you just try those three, you're in.
Now be fair, Steve. Maybe they capitalized the P in password.
I forgot. Yes, you're right. So one of those four.
As we say in the IT department, it's capital P and then password and then 123. It's the only time I get to say ass word while I'm at the church. But yeah, that enumeration of it, looking through to see which accounts actually have posts, and then if those posts are attached to a user account, and then it just goes from there, and being able to kind of figure out which accounts they can start hacking on.
Yep.
So yeah, there's that. I think that's like the starting point is if you're having that issue, you need to figure out how to get in there, change that user account, and then make sure you have a good solid password. And that's where a password manager comes into play. Like, we haven't even talked about like WordPress itself, but having good passwords and not using the same passwords on every freaking site you're using, or changing how many exclamation marks you have at the end of it, or putting the word like Google for Google and Yahoo for Yahoo and YouTube for YouTube. Like, don't do all that. There's better ways of doing it, and there's great products that are out there that you can use for password management. So look at those.
1Password.
I use 1Password.
Yes.
And it's not the 1Password. It is the name of the product called the number 1 and then password. That's capital P and then lowercase password.
So I like using 1Password. I have used 1Password for, I mean, it's been 8 or 9 years at this point, a really long time. However, 1Password recently got some outside funding, which I think is interesting. And once you kind of start going into the whole venture funding route, I've seen products kind of go bad after that. Now, of course, in the WordPress space, there are a handful of venture funded companies, and their products have only gotten better. Take WP Engine's hosting, for example. Like, they have actually put that money to good use. But that is a concern to me. There is an open source version, and I know it's like, open source, it must look like crap.
Are you about to say KeePass?
No, I'm not about to say
good.
KeePass. I'm about to say Bitwarden. Have you looked at Bitwarden at all?
Oh, I have not.
Bitwarden has an import from 1Password. It's something that I've considered using over the past few months as I've seen things. It's nice to know to have like an escape route planned when it comes to some crucial software like your password manager. So Bitwarden, if you don't have a password manager, it might be something to consider installing. It's clear that nobody has a problem with open source software since they're using WordPress. So
it's open source. Does that mean I'm hosting Bitwarden myself?
You can. I believe they also have a hosted solution that they will do for you as well.
If you do host Bitwarden yourself, put an SSL certificate in place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Please.
Oh man,
I'm just throwing that one out there because I still love 1Password, but if you're looking at other ones, maybe consider it.
Yeah.
Well, but also WordPress itself, aside from 1Password, and this is all important, but WordPress itself now enforces strong passwords, right? So more recent versions of WordPress will enforce strong passwords, but you need to use it, right? And so you need, if you have a site that you've upgraded from an old version of WordPress and you haven't changed your passwords, change your passwords. And so most of this some of this is part technology, and some of this is part your workflow or process, right? And so as part of your process with your WordPress site, you should have a regular interval where you're changing your passwords.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
Then it doesn't need to be as crazy as your IT person is forcing you to do. Like, for instance, there's places that they want you to change their password every 30 days or 60 days or something like that. At that point, you're just going to start putting more exclamation marks at the end of your password. So don't do that.
new passwords.
Yeah. Or the number of times that I hear this at the church I work at, you pick a Bible, Bible book, a book of the Bible, and you're like, Genesis 1:1, and that's literally the password. I'm like, guys, all of those, like, if it's anything that has to do with the type of work you do, if you're into, if you work at a zoo, like, don't pick like animal passwords, like, like there's figure it out, whatever it is that you're doing. And, if you work at an auto dealership, don't pick car names as your passwords. Like, I
gotta go change all my passwords right now.
I feel like in the first season of Mr. Robot, he's trying to figure out someone's password and goes through their Facebook likes and looks at, like, okay, here's his baseball team, here's basketball team, hobbies, stuff like that, and then just builds his word list based off of that. So if you can use something like 1Password or Bitwarden that generates a completely random password for you, that is really a better way to go.
Yeah. Agreed. All right.
Yeah, so like
we talked about passwords for 10 minutes.
We did. But I think there's some good in that. So at least looking at that, making sure people aren't getting into your website is probably a good thing to do. I think next after that is protecting the website itself. So looking at some type of web-based firewall, that might be something to look into.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of different ones that are out there. You may want to just kind of start looking around and seeing what is available to you. You also have apps that run or plugins that run within it as well, like something like WordFence or some of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like there's those types of things that exist. What's a good one other than that?
I mean, I tend to not depend on plugins for the security of my website. Yep. I know that people love iTheme security. And they've long had luck with that, but I tend to not depend on those plugins. I will say for like firewalls, web app firewalls, there are hosts that have, I know DreamHost has they'll throw on extra security rules on top of, basically they have like a set of mod security, which is a module for Apache and Nginx, I believe, that'll throw rules on top. So you may not even need an external firewall, depending on your host. But something like Cloudflare.
I was just going to say Cloudflare is a good one.
Yeah.
Cloudflare security.
So Sakuri definitely. Sakuri also has a number of products. Actually, they have a plugin, a security plugin as well, that does some checks and stuff like that. So they're worth taking a look at.
But their plugin is more doing sort of verification types of things and checks on your site itself. Their SaaS is really doing the majority of the work. So the plugin kind of gives you access to their SaaS, right? But yeah, the two SaaS products that Casper just mentioned, we've had success with both of those, either Security or Cloudflare. Those are really pretty easy to set up and don't really require a plugin, right? That's something you put in at the DNS level.
Yeah. Where it hits that first before, and sometimes you even get the added kind of added feature of being able to have a CDN tied into that as well. So
CDN caching, that's all built into both systems, right? So you get some scalability out of it as well.
Now, if I can be a naysayer for a second, I do like Cloudflare. But I also have a little bit of a reluctance on putting so much of the internet behind Cloudflare's infrastructure, as to the point where if Cloudflare fails and a quarter or a third or whatever, as they keep starting to pick up more people putting their sites behind Cloudflare, using their free DNS service, stuff like that. If they have a major catastrophic failure, like we've seen from AWS, like we've seen from stuff like that, then that becomes a big problem. So kind of spreading it around a little bit and considering Sakuri, considering Encapsula, which is another one, it is always a good idea to kind of think about that and consider that you don't necessarily want to put so much of the internet behind a single point of failure.
But Casper, do those run off of lava lamps like Cloudflare does?
That's actually their server farm.
Yeah.
I haven't heard of an Encapsula. Have you touched that at all? Have you used it?
I mean, they basically do the same thing as Cloudflare and Sakuri as far as the firewalling goes. So it's just basically an extra set of security rules. They pass traffic along to your website, but filter out a lot of the bad stuff that's coming through.
They have an entire wall of magic 8 balls. You walk in and all the 8 balls are switching.
Right.
Is firewall a verb? Because you just use it as one.
Anything can be a verb if you try hard enough.
Yeah, you just add ing apparently on the end of it. I'm just curious.
Anything's a verb if you can push it, right? Is that what it is?
I love it.
All right, so we've talked about being able to make sure that you're protecting the site from, evildoers that are trying to get into the site, as well as just being denial of service attacks and all that fun stuff as well. What else is there? I would say that going through the plugins that you have installed and figuring out, am I actually using this plugin or not? And if it hasn't been updated in a while, you may want to think about, maybe switching to one of their competitors and using a different one that's actually been updated. What do you guys think about that?
Totally, yeah. I mean, there's two kinds of out of dates, right? And I think we've talked about this on past episodes, right? There's just keeping your plugins and your WordPress up to date is important for security, right? Because those things get security patches all the time. But if a plugin, you may look at your plugin area inside of your dashboard, and it may show that everything's up to date, right? But that's just showing that you have the most recent version of a plugin. If a plugin hasn't been updated in 2 years, right, it's not really showing there in your dashboard. So that's something to be aware of. Is if a plugin is just no longer under active development, which is what you're saying, Jason, then you may want to look to switching to something else. And again, that's not apparent by just looking at your dashboard.
Yeah, for people who've had the same plugins for, however long, or people who, I've seen sites that have 40, 50, 60 plugins. I don't necessarily expect somebody to go through and look at every single plugin that they're running, have active, whatever, and try to figure out if it's been updated recently. It would be nice if WordPress core had something where they actually said, here's when the plugin was last updated. I feel like Pete Mall, I want to say, had a from Range, at least that's where he was working at the time, used to have a code snippet that you could put in and add like a plugin last updated thing, but to the column to your plugins. But and we lost.
He stepped away for a second.
Yeah. There was a plugin that he had, but it hasn't been updated. Funny enough, in probably 7 years or something like that at this point. But it would be nice if we could just have a column like that, an informational column in core, because knowing when the plugin was last updated is a very important thing. Yeah,
it shows you that there's at least some activity that's happening there.
Absolutely.
One of the things that going back to Security's security scanning plugin, one of the things I really liked about that that I haven't seen in very many other ones is the fact that it'll do file integrity monitoring to see if a file has changed. And that also works well with looking at if the plugins have changed as well. So if someone went and uploaded a malicious version of the plugin or changed something or something like that, that's something to look at as well. And it'll even go and re-download a copy of that plugin to refresh it right on the fly, as well as refreshing the any of the core files that may have changed as well. I think if you're getting into that, then that means security obviously didn't work for you. Yeah, and you're probably gonna have to maybe hire somebody to go through it, and you could even hire security to do it if you want to kind of go in and clean out that site. But yeah, just because you go and replace a couple files doesn't necessarily mean it's cleaned up the site. There's probably other things that are happening as well.
And so plugins aren't the only danger there, right? Themes go through updates as well, and themes have had security problems themselves. What was the is it Tim Thumb? Is that what the thing that was?
Yeah.
Remember that? So there were a lot of themes that were on I believe on Envato that had that included in it, and those were all vulnerable at one point because of that particular thing.
Or you have themes that include, actually, instead of saying you need to download this plugin, include something like a slider plugin. Yeah. And include the slider plugin in their theme, and then you have an out-of-date theme that you tried once, never actually used, and it's still on your site. So going through and auditing out and getting rid of those themes you're not going to go back and use, good idea. Also a good idea, and kind of to go back to passwords a little bit, is you need to take a look at your users and see who has administrator privileges on your site. Because a lot of times you go, oh, okay, I'll make you an admin so you can do this thing. and then you have basically handed the keys to your entire site over to somebody who, maybe only needed to make one change or a quick thing. It's good that you weren't just sharing your admin password with them, but go back in and make sure that they actually still need to be there.
Yeah.
And if you are sharing your admin password, which I highly recommend against, don't do it over email.
True. True. I've had places where they'll send you half the password and then they'll call you with the other half, or they'll text you with one.
That's fine. All of that is fine. Send it over Slack. All of that is fine.
Yeah.
It's better than email.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, some hosts, when they're doing support on your site, may ask you to set them up a user account, right? And those are meant to be temporary. So along the same lines of what you were just saying, Cosper, right? Make sure you clean up those things, right? Or if you made somebody an admin at one point, but they still need a user account, fine. Just change their access level back down to something that's normal.
Yep, get rid of them if you need to.
It's the end of January, and I know spring cleaning is still a couple months away. But thanks to climate change, it feels like it's kind of getting a little springy. So just go ahead and start your spring cleaning now.
So one of the things you said, and I want to touch on again, I want to reiterate, you'd said go through and deactivate or look through plugins that you may not be using anymore. Not only deactivate them, but delete them. Get rid of them. Just get that code out of there, right? It's probably not doing anything, but it's still code that could be potentially used to access parts of your server by a hacker. So take all that stuff out of there. Any extra code just should not be there.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to the whole themes thing and having old themes that are laying around in there, tools like WPScan will scan for themes that are old themes that are just sitting around in there that aren't being used. I've logged into sites where they'll have, every single 2012, 2013, 2014, or you have like the DreamHost type sites that may have 500 different themes that are installed on there because at some point they were pre-installing themes, or you just have all these different ones that are out there. And if you find a theme that has a vulnerability in it, they can still execute that data, execute the scripts that are in there just by going to that URL directly to run it.
And if you are actually able to log in like through an FTP or even better an SSH and look at the actual file structure, take a look and see what's in the root directory, right? See if something looks like it's out of place, right? Right? Because there are things that you're asked to install in the root directory, like a Google verification file, which are okay, right? But sometimes things just show up that are either created by a plugin or maybe you got a legitimate hack. So just take a look around and see if there's something that doesn't feel like it's normal WordPress.
Because sometimes the hackers can't get rid of all the files that they left behind. So you'll have like aaa.php sitting in there. You go to that URL, don't do it. But if you were to go to that URL, a file managing a plugin will show up that's fully, showing the entire, list of files that are in your site, and they're digging around looking for passwords and all that fun stuff.
And if you do that and you find some files that look like they're out of place, feel like they're out of place, just hire security. They'll do a malware cleanup for you. They'll get rid of all that bad stuff for you.
And one of the places that you should consider turning off, especially if you never use it, is the file editor for themes and plugins on your site. That is one of the major points of infection. If someone actually gets your password, if you're not using 1Password, if you're using, a weak password or something like that, they see one of the first places that hackers go check, as somebody who used to do hack site cleanups, looking through the log files, is they go to the plugin editor, they go to the theme editor, and then they start adding, shells, things like that, where they can actually start accessing more and more and more of your site. And messing with your files a lot deeper.
Perfect. That's exactly right. We add that to everything.
Yeah. No reason to edit a file like that.
Yeah. One of the other plugins that are types of plugins that we look for and tend to disable that people just leave are things like migration plugins, right? Database access plugins, those kinds of things that are just sitting in the dashboard, right? That's just too much access. And so we first of all, we just disable and delete those things if we're managing a site. But I can't tell you how many sites, almost every site that we take on, right, still has their original migration plugin just sitting there, just sitting there waiting to be exploited. Or what is it? The database backup, those kinds of plugins, right? Those are easy ways for people to get all of your data or access all of your data or change all of your data.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen backups that will go into some file or some folder that is available, that's accessible directly, and it lists all the files that are in there. Just like, which backup do I want? Easy. Yep. No problem. Yep. Look at that.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So yeah, get rid of that stuff. You don't need it, right? And by the way, your backups in this day and age should be taken care of by your host, right? Any good managed WordPress host will have a backup system for you, so you don't need a backup plugin.
See, I argue a little bit with that. If you're gonna use a backup plugin, use a backup plugin that dumps someplace offsite. Backup Buddy, VaultPress, whatever you want to use. There is. I don't know what branch of the military it's from, but it's if you're only depending on one backup, that backup can go bad too. But if you have a backup of your backup, then you have two places that you can look for files, especially if your site gets hacked. You want to be able to have, here is a second place I can go check for stuff, especially if you don't realize that your site was hacked months ago and your host only keeps 30 days of backups.
Absolutely true, and I agree with you. I agree with your point. I think though the plugins that you mentioned are definitely worth it. Those are good ones to have, right? Things that do backups off-site. What I wouldn't do is just go search the WordPress plugin repo for a backup plugin, right? Something that is backing up your database to your same system, right? To the file structure within WordPress. Just stay away from that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see here. What else could there be security wise that we should be looking at real quick here in the last 2 minutes that we got?
Admin. Sorry, did I jump in there? Go ahead, Casper.
PHP My Admin is a good one. Don't install it unless a lot of hosts actually provide it, and have it set up in a way where it's securely done and correctly done. Running your own version of that, not a good idea. I was going to kind of touch a little bit on having a service that helps you manage your site. A lot of people don't have just a single site. They have 2 or 3 or 20 or whatever. So iThemes has something that basically allows you to manage your sites. There's ManageWP. There's Infinite WP. Is that still a thing? But that's for people who want to install stuff on their own server, and will be out of the purview of a lot of our listeners. But ManageWP is definitely still around, and is definitely worth it if you need to put all of your sites someplace. And they give you a dashboard where you can update your plugins, update your themes. So going in and checking that once, twice, whatever a week. Yeah. But checking that regularly and making sure, instead of checking each one of your sites over and over and over again, you have one place to go, you have one button to click, and they'll take care of the updates. They'll help you take care of the updates. It definitely helps.
Yeah. I agree. If there's a way to at least manage that stuff off-site, especially if you have a ton of sites. I use Infinite WP at my work, and I have it running on a local server in my network, and it's just constantly checking for that stuff and letting me know when it needs to be updated. And Works good, but yeah, there's other ones out there that as well. Main WP is another one that you can take a look at. So if you got a bunch of sites and you're wanting to manage them, or if you're starting a business where you're going to be managing other people's sites, it's better to do this remotely than to sit there and try to log into every single site to take a look at it and figure it all out. So yeah, definitely go take a look at those all different alternatives that are out there to see how you can do that.
Totally.
Half a dozen sites, a dozen sites, whatever, and you don't use something like this, you probably have a dozen or half a dozen sites that are out of date in one way or another.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Honestly.
All right, folks. Well, I want to say thank you very much for hanging out with us. I really appreciate it. I do want to let you know that next week on WP Watercooler, we're doing something totally new. We're calling it Dev Branch, and it's going to be a developer track type setup here. So we're going to be talking about just developer-y type things. So if you're someone who's like
binary,
yeah. So if you're some of those people that listen to this stuff and this stuff feels like it's over your head, then next week is going to definitely be over your head. But if this stuff sounds like it's like, oh, that's cool, but I really want to hear some more advanced things, we're definitely going to be talking about some more advanced things on next week's episode. So go take a look at WP Watercooler's Dev Branch. So I'll talk to y'all later. You have a good one. Bye-bye.